This is Upward. I've never seen this person's video before, but slaves, eunuchs, and the Islamic conquest of India. Slavery in Islamic India.
Slavery is old, really old. Romans did it, Greeks did it, ancient Egyptians did it. But for a long time, it was...
Americans did it, and to this day, it's still a reoccurring trend. A reoccurring trend. Anyone that says, well, slavery is abolished, but anyone that says slavery still doesn't exist is lying to themselves. It still exists to this day. There's still people who get around it, still able to utilize it, still able to do it.
Just the ugly side of human nature. The primal desire for cheap labor and domination. But then, history took a sharp turn. Slavery got a religious upgrade. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century, slavery was woven directly into the very fabric of religion and law. It wasn't just allowed. For non-believers, it was practically a divine mandate. The rules were simple. The earth belonged to the believers. The non-believers, they had no rights. They could be killed, plundered, or turned into property.
I mean, yeah. How can you have it makes labor easy when you have a whole segment of people which are inhuman. A whole branch of humanity that are inhuman. I mean, it works like in most socialist societies. That's how they tend to work. They tend to have a free labor source, which is the slaves, the inferior people.
The Prophet Muhammad himself kept slaves and sold captives of war for horses and weapons, setting a massive historical precedent. Slavery was now an act of piety, a way to bring...
Middle East and Africa is filled with slavery, but you can't talk about that because that's racist and Islamophobic. Yeah, it's funny how people will always use those terms to try to get out of to try to get away with evil deeds. You should always be able to call out evil deeds. Being a monster is monstrous. It's just plain and simple. Plain and simple. If you treat someone like an animal, you deserve to be treated like an animal yourself. If you act like an animal, you belong in a cage. I don't care where you come from in the world. I don't care what your skin tone is. If you're acting out and causing problems in civil society, you don't belong in common places with civilized people. Which is why a lot of people talk about how there are certain ideologies that don't mix with Western culture because of the barbarism that's mixed in with some of it. The barbarism that's mixed in with some of it. Not that all are like that. That's the thing. It's just like the problem is it gets so extreme that it ends up roping everyone in, even those that aren't even correlated with the original extreme. Like I remember seeing that firsthand during like after 9/11. Like even Sikhs were being insulted just because they were wearing a turban. Like they were being insulted and being called heinous things and not wanted in areas just because of the attack on the Twin Towers.
Savages into the fold of civilization and the true faith. Fast forward a bit. The Islamic empires are expanding rapidly. And right next door is a massive, wealthy, heavily populated land full of people who worship idols. India. In the 8th century, the Arab general Muhammad bin Qasim marches into Sindh. He doesn't just conquer, he captures. At the city of Deval, all men aged 17 and up are put to the sword.
I'm not gonna lie, I like this animation. It reminds me of the original Clone Wars. Not the 3D Clone Wars, the original 2D Clone Wars. That one was epic.
The women and children enslaved. Qasim captures thousands of people, keeps a fifth for the caliph, and hands the rest out to his soldiers as prizes. But Qasim was just the opening act. Enter Mahmud of Ghazni. Mahmud is a Turkish conqueror with a ferocious appetite for wealth and slaves. In the year 1001, he attacks India and takes 500,000 people captive in a single campaign. A few years later, he hits Thanesar and brings back 200,000 captives. Ghazni, his capital, suddenly looks like an Indian city because every single soldier in his army now owns several slaves. Let's pause and picture this. How do you enslave 500,000 people? It wasn't easy, and it wasn't peaceful. The armies would arrive fighting the defending forces and execute the able-bodied men.
No.
They would pile their skulls into massive...
I saw a white guy below the Critical Drinker Duranda review talking about how he won't watch the movie made by subhuman, does he not know wireless communication Wi-Fi was invented by that subhuman? No, he doesn't. Like again, I'm open about my ignorance. I'm open about my ignorance because if it doesn't affect me personally, I don't care. Like I've mentioned, if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't have bothered learning about India. Of course, I wouldn't have been calling Indians subhuman to begin with. The thing is, a lot of people have half of my mindset, where if it doesn't affect them, they're not going to learn about it, but they have no problem being racial or offensive towards people because they think themselves superior. They think that because they're in the first world and they're in the world superpower, that they're superior to everybody else. That's the mindset. That's the mindset going into it. It has actually nothing to do with logic or reason. And of course, there are the same kind of delusional, crazy people in India as well. Just like there are the same kind of crazy, delusional people in China. You get them all over the place. But the U.S. is our educational system is completely broken. I'm going to be honest. If it wasn't for me going to independent studies and learning for myself, I probably would be just as idiotic as the rest of them. It's because I was given my lesson plan. I didn't go to a school. I had to learn things for myself. I had to read the textbooks myself. I had to fill out the reports because there was no teacher just standing in front of me, just yapping off information. Jot this down. It's going to be on the test. Jot this down. It's going to be on the test. All right. The test is an open notebook quiz. So open your notebooks and all the answers are there because the teacher told you all the answers. That's how people get past school. That and AI.
Terrifying towers to break the spirit of the survivors. Then they would round up the non-combatants, the women and the children. They would tie them up with ropes of Hessian, put them in iron shackles and march them away. These captives were morally shattered, deliberately humiliated and paraded in public to destroy any hope of resistance. They were then marched across the mountains, out of India, to slave markets in Central Asia. Merchants would flock to Ghazni from Iraq and Khorasan just to...
If the U.S. Fixes its education system, they'll solve 90% of these issues. It goes hand in hand. So we need to actually be strict with our incarcerations. We need to reopen asylums. We need to actually be stricter on education and actually fail people. And that people that don't qualify, they honestly need to do something with them. A labor camp or something, a place for them to actually add value to society, but also be kind of away from society. So that way it pushes people to want to work harder to get out of what their parents probably put them in. They want to work harder to get out. That would be the driving force. But yeah, there would be several layers that need to go into it, and incarcerations. So that way people know that there are consequences to being a barbarian in society. So if you're not adding positives to society and you're just a net negative, well, there has to be consequences to those actions. Not a slap on the wrist after you're taken to the precinct, after you're jailed for a night for, well, stealing or whatever, or drunken intoxication and then let loose. No, there have to be harder punishments.
By them. The supply was so massive that Indian slaves became incredibly cheap. At one point, you could buy a slave for just 2 to 10 dirhams. Sometimes they were even bartered for horses or dogs. Now, here is where the story gets weird. Really weird. The Muslim Empire in India was eventually ruled by slaves. Yes, you heard that right. It's called the Mamluk or slave dynasty. You see, the Turkish invaders loved to buy young Turkish boys and train them strictly as elite soldiers and administrators. Because these slaves had no family and no ties, they were completely loyal to their masters. Or so the theory went. Sultan Muhammad Ghauri had no sons, but he had thousands of these Turkish slaves. When he died, his slaves didn't just serve the empire, they took it. A slave named Qutbuddin Aybak, who had been bought and sold multiple times, ascended the throne of Delhi in 1206. He was succeeded by Iltutmish, who was the slave of a slave. Later came Balban, another purchased slave who became king. It sounds like a meritocracy, but don't be fooled. These slaves didn't become kings because the system was kind. They became kings because they were ruthless. They wielded the sword, assassinated their rivals, blinded princes, and seized power by force. Loyalty was a luxury. Conspiracy was the rule. As one slave king put it, you don't take the world through inheritance, you take it by the sword. Meanwhile, back on the ground, the millions of Hindu captives were not becoming kings. They were the engine of the empire. The new Islamic rulers wanted to show off their might, so they built massive monuments. Qutbuddin Aybak built the Quwwatul Islam Mosque, literally meaning the might of Islam. using the rubble of 27 demolished Hindu and Jain temples. Who did the heavy lifting? Slaves. Under a later ruler, Alauddin Khalji, 70,000 slaves worked constantly just on his building projects. Slaves did absolutely everything. They cleared jungles, they set up military camps that were 10 kilometers square, they cared for 70,000 cavalry horses and thousands of war elephants. They were foot soldiers called pikes, thrust into the front lines of battles. The Sultan Firoz Shah Tughlaq was utterly obsessed with collecting slaves. He commanded his officers to capture them whenever they went to war. He ended up with 180,000 slaves. He put 12,000 of them into state workshops called karkhanas to manufacture weapons, weave luxury textiles, and craft armor. The medieval Muslim state was a machine, and slaves were the gears. But we have to talk about the darkest part of this system, the harems.
Like, I like the animation when it's 2D, but when they go into the 3D AI, I don't like that. I think they should have just stuck with the 2D AI. The animation is more pleasant. Is more pleasant to see. When they do like the 3D movements, it feels a little off.
In the medieval Muslim world, sex slavery wasn't a hidden secret. It was a celebrated perk of conquest. The religious texts allowed men to have up to 4 wives, but there was absolutely zero limit on the number of slave girls they could cohabit with. They were called what your right hand possesses. When a city fell, the women were immediately divided up as plunder. Kings had thousands of women in their harems. Alauddin Khalji alone had 50,000 slave boys in his personal service. Slaves were given away as gifts on religious holidays. Ibn Battuta, a famous traveler, casually mentions receiving 10 captive girls from the king's minister, keeping 1, giving 3 to a friend, and not knowing what happened to the rest. Because of
a little hard to process in the brain. Yeah, it really is. It really is. Like I can't fathom. I really can't. I mean, what's the point? What's the point? Like I remember going to like a what temple was it in Rajasthan? What fortress? It was in the Pink City. Not Agra Fort, but I remember doing the tour, and then they pointed out the balcony that the Sultan would stand on, and he could see all his flowers in the garden, and flowers was the term for like his 13 wives. And each one, they all had their own distinct area. And I was just like, Fatehpur, Sikri. Okay. Yeah, just like, how is that possible? Like, while we were there, the entire time, I was like, looking at my wife, I'm like, what? It's like, I don't think I'd be able to live. Because I can't understand spending my time with like more than one person. But then again, I work for a living. I mean, if you're a sultan and you have all the time in the world, except for every now and then you see the constituents as they come up and have a complaint, but you have all the viziers and everyone beneath you that does all the actual work of the city, you don't need to worry. But it's just like, I can't fathom that. I can't, like, even like people nowadays who string on like multiple women, it's so confusing. How do you have time for that? I mean, do you literally do like an Excel spreadsheet in order to have everyone's time divided? It makes no sense. It makes no sense to me. I can't fathom it. I cannot. And it's just like, here they have 1,000. How do you spend time with 1,000? Or is it literally just to show like how powerful you are? Look at all I own. You don't spend time with any of them because they're slaves. They're like cats in your yard. They're like dogs in your field. They're not important enough to actually get to know. But I just can't fathom it. I really can't. It's so confusing. It's so confusing. How can people keep 4 wives? Isn't one enough to absolutely keep you under control? Yes. One is enough. One is enough. And that's the thing. It's just like, I believe in like dedicating myself to one person. I've always found it weird. Like even in the Bible, it's always weird when they have like more than one. It's just like, this is just insane. But back in the day, why was it a thing? Because war happened more often, surprisingly, than it happens now. Even though there's the Iran, US, even though there's Russia, Ukraine, even though like there's multiple things going on at any point in time, there's like less war going on now and less bodily or human lives being lost than there were back in the day. And who were the ones that were primarily lost in war? Men. Who were the ones that like there were more women of back in the day? Or what gender was there more of back in the day? Women, because men kept dying off in war. So it makes sense that there would be like more wives to each guy. I mean, heck, it was in Japan where they added a clause for like I'm just not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, certain things was legal at some point in time because they were having too many wars and too many of the shoguns were killing each other off because they wanted the emperor as a figurehead, that too many men were dying off, that they needed more people brought into society, that certain things were allowed to happen. Certain things were allowed to happen. It wasn't for a long period of time, but it was a period of time. But yeah, I mean, I can't fathom this.
With this endless demand for harems, there was an enormous demand for guards. But you can't just let regular men guard a palace full of thousands of women.
Nope.
So they created eunuchs. Tens of thousands of young boys were captured, violently castrated, and turned into eunuchs to serve as harem guards, administrators, and domestic servants. The survival rate for this brutal surgery was terrible, making eunuchs highly expensive. The practice was so widespread that in places like Bengal, people actually paid their taxes to the government by handing over castrated boys. This cruel system gave rise to the Hijras of India, a community that still exists today, originally descended from these medieval eunuch slaves. Let's go deeper into the rules, because in this system, there were rules for everything. Islamic law, laid out in massive volumes like the Hidayah and later the Fatwa-i-Alamgiri, regulated the slave trade down to the smallest, most unsettling details. Slaves were property, classified exactly like livestock or grain. If you bought a slave girl, the law determined whether you could get a refund if she had bad breath, snored, or had a physical defect. There were rules for manumission, freeing a slave. A master could earn religious brownie points by freeing a slave, often declaring them mudabbir, meaning they would be freed upon the master's death. This sounded nice, but it meant the slaves spent their entire youth serving the master, only gaining freedom when they were too old to actually enjoy it. And even then, captured infidels could not be freed at all unless they converted to Islam first. If a slave converted, they might eventually earn freedom. But if they abandoned Islam, death. The slave markets themselves were heavily regulated. Sultan Alauddin Khilji famously imposed strict price controls on the markets of Delhi. A standard working girl cost 5 to 12 tankas. A good-looking girl for the harem, 20 to 40 tankas. A handsome boy, 20 to 30 tankas. Alauddin cut out the middlemen so that
I think it should have started off by explaining what the currency was of the day, because he's just saying that as if I'm supposed to understand. I'm an imbecile here. I don't know. I don't know.
The massive profits of selling human beings went directly into the state treasury. When he died, the slave brokers actually marched into the streets to celebrate. Then there was the internal politics. Not all slaves were treated equally. The Muslim Empire was deeply racist. White slaves imported from Central Asia or Europe, Turks, Persians, Georgians, were the elite. They were expensive, highly trained, and placed in top administrative or military roles. Black slaves from Africa, known as Habshis or Abyssinians, were imported in massive numbers. Muslim writers at the time associated black skin with menial labor, describing them in horribly degrading terms. Despite this, some black slaves rose to prominence as fierce fighters or admirals, like the Siris of Janjira. But they were largely looked down upon by the lighter-skinned elites. And at the very bottom of the hierarchy, the native Indian slaves. The foreign Turkish nobles despised the Indian converts. Even though Indian pikes or foot soldiers were fiercely loyal, often saving their masters from assassination, they were paid less, given the hardest labor, and treated with utter contempt. The historian Ziauddin Barani specifically recommended that Indian converts should be denied education, calling them low-born, worthless plebeian. So, how did the people of India react to this relentless machine of enslavement and forced conversion? They fought back. Hard.
Good.
When defeat seemed certain, Rajput women would commit Johar, throwing themselves into massive fires to burn to ashes rather than be captured and dragged into a conqueror's harem. The peasants and villagers had a different strategy. When the invading armies approached, entire communities would abandon their homes and run into the dense, thorny jungles.
See, that's the thing. That's the point. Like, so in, what is it? In Sati, she's the one that lit herself on fire. Like, In that story, I don't understand, because it's just like her loved one's still out there. Her father was the one being insulting. Why would she do that and deprive the one she loves of not being with her because of what her father said? To me, that doesn't make sense. But here you have them literally killing themselves before the barbarians at their gates take advantage of them. I completely understand. I completely understand it. It's like, yeah, you know the heinous acts that are going to be acted upon you. You run at them with a blade. You do whatever you can. Like, what is it? You shoot. You use up all the bullets except for one, and you're gone. So that way you can use the last on yourself. I mean, that's just how the mindset had to be in order to prevent the monsters from ever getting a foothold. You have to make it so heinous. You have to make their acts, like anytime they try and incite anything, they have to make the retaliation of it be so brutal that they never even think of acting upon that kind of impulse again. Never try to think about being a barbarian again, because they're too afraid of how they will, the people that they're attacking will react. That's how you end up controlling. And yes, there are going to be thousands of people that get martyred, thousands of people who are never remembered in the future, because they lose their lives for the greater good of maintaining their people and scaring off the barbarians. Not the civilized people, the barbarians. Anyone who does the initial attacking, like you can look at the Great Crusades, you can look at like the colonizations, you can like anyone who initiates anything is the barbarian. Is the barbarian, because guess what? They're not opening with discussions first. They're just outright attacking.
They chose to live like wild animals, eating roots and scraping by in the wilderness, just to hold on to their freedom and their faith. They survived, but they paid a terrible price. By isolating themselves in the forests for centuries, these proud warriors and farmers were cut off from education, wealth, and civilization. Over generations, they were impoverished. Today, many of these same groups make up India's scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Their current social status is a direct hangover from their medieval ancestors choosing the extreme hardship of the jungle over the chains of Islamic slavery. The Muslim slave system in India was unlike anything the subcontinent had ever seen. In ancient India, slavery was mild, small-scale, and lacked religious venom. The new system was a massive state-sponsored industry driven by holy war.
They burned themselves instead of poison or blade because barbarians even violated dead bodies. Yeah. I mean, they'd hang them outside of forts as an example as to what happens. Like everything was completely defiled.
It changed the demographics of India forever. Every single captive dragged away in chains was eventually forced to convert to Islam. Slave taking was the most successful missionary activity of the empire. As these captive populations grew and reproduced, they swelled the numbers of the Muslim population, fundamentally altering the cultural and religious map of the subcontinent. It was a system interwoven with the laws of marriage, the laws of sale, and the laws of war. It built breathtaking monuments, filled sprawling harems, and raised slaves to the thrones of kings. But it was built on a foundation of crushed skulls, burning cities, and millions of invisible people whose blood and sweat vanished into the sands of history.
I like that. I need to put a like on the video. Yeah, because again, it's so insane how always the people who view themselves to be civilized always seem to act the most barbarian, because they want to bring civilization to the barbarians. And you always need to start with discussion. If you can't talk to the people, then you can't have a civilized discussion, and you can't go in with force. Well, I guess in the UK, they didn't go in with force. They literally just opened the gates and allowed the hordes to enter. But it's just, you have to be able to talk to people. And it's when you can't talk to somebody and you can't see eye to eye. And that's the thing. No one will ever see eye to eye, but you should be able to have the ability to talk to people and be like, you know what? I don't agree with this point of view. Here is why. And you can agree to disagree. It's those people that, and this happens in like the here in the West, it's those people who refuse to even acknowledge your point of view that are the barbarians that need to be silenced in some cases, and in others locked up because they clearly aren't able to have a rational conversation. They're too locked into their extremes that they just can't think properly anymore. They can't think rationally. And it happens a lot now. I mean, everyone plays on their emotions about how they feel in situations. Like, you shouldn't do that. That has people's emotions are what lead to more problems than anything. People get angry, people get enraged. It causes problems. Whether you're having fun, whether you're incredibly angry, emotions can cause problems. You have to think logically in most situations. And the problem is, when it comes to talking with people of a different perspective, different belief, different ideologies, a lot of the times emotions get locked into the discussions, that in the end you can't talk with them anymore. You just can't. And sometimes you don't want to avoid heated conversations. But at the same time, if like there are those people that are like refusing to even acknowledge your perspective, refusing to even hear you out, then there's no point in trying to have that discussion. There's no point in trying to have that discussion. That was a good one. That was a good one. I like that.
You guys see the video? It was so bad.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Wait like that.